Hey everyone, just a really quick thing we want to talk about before we get into this episode. First of all, we just want to say thank you to all of you who have been tuning in and have been staying with us. I think this is episode 6.
5 or 6, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much. If you guys are just tuning in for the first time, the reason we're doing this, it's called The Spiritual Gap. We release every Wednesday, and we just want to fill that gap between the Sundays with some content on Wednesdays. So we dive deeper into what we talked about on Sunday sometimes.
We try to talk about, the relevant things as well as the scripture as well.
Totally.
Usually we do a pretty good job tying it in.
Yeah, but it is a time for us to go deeper and take a little bit longer into those things. So that's why we're here. But especially with this episode, I mean, we talk about a lot of things in this one, a little bit about politics, some stuff about exorcisms and demon possession and things like that. So if you've got little ears around, this may be one that you don't want to play in the speakers until you give it a little pre-listen. Mm-hmm. So that's it. Here we go.
Let's do it.
So Ronnie wanted to make, first of all, shout out to Ronnie.
Shout out Ronnie.
She also listens to all the episodes.
Heyo.
And gives very thoughtful feedback.
Yeah.
So thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you, Ronnie.
I think it was maybe 2 podcasts ago, we were talking about Paul. And
Okay.
we were talking about spiritual authority and
Okay.
how the Apostle Paul went to Peter.
Yes, I remember this.
I think we were slightly off on the timeline. Because he had been...
If I remember correctly, you said this though, so.
No, I said this. It was 100% me.
Ronnie's holding you accountable.
Yeah. Thanks, Ronnie. But Paul had been walking. Paul had his revelation at Damascus like 2 years prior to the event.
Okay.
And I think we made it. We were talking about it like it was like
immediate.
a couple weeks.
Yeah. Okay.
Not true. It was like 2 years. Very well documented in scripture.
That's why this podcast, we talk through ideas and we have humility when, because we're not saying we're right all the time.
Correct.
Yeah. We're just like talking about these things. Yeah. And if we never would have talked about it, Ronnie wouldn't have been able to tell you. We never would have known.
Exactly.
I mean, I guess if we thought about it more and looked in the Bible, we would have known, but.
Totally.
But thank you, Ronnie.
I think, I think it is really, this is exciting because I would love to know more scripture than I do.
Yeah.
It's like always I would love to know, but humans have limits.
It's true. And the reality of the Bible is it's a library. It's 66 books. Mm-hmm. And so it's a lot to handle.
Yeah.
And it's long enough that if you read it and if you don't keep going back, you either forget, An example, I read Narnia series, The Chronicles of Narnia, like 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And now I totally forget most of the
totally.
But like within the first couple of months after you read, like you finish the series, you ponder it and you're like, wow, that was so good. And then it's just like you just lose it. And I feel like it's the same with the Bible.
Yeah. I think that's the fun thing about it's like my wife and I watched Lord of the Rings a couple of times.
We just finished the series. Yeah. I think it says last episode about my wife and I just finished The Return of the King, 2 weeks ago now.
Yeah, and I feel like Scripture's the same way, and you just got to keep revisiting it,
Yeah. So it seems like one of our themes for our podcast, outside of slowing down, is Lord of the Rings, and then Costco is the same.
Costco. Slow down, humility, Costco, Lord of the Rings.
That's it. That's the order.
Yeah.
If we have merch someday, we'll just have a list of a T-shirt that says those things. Hey, but a couple shout-outs. One, we got to shout out some of our best listeners.
Yep.
Stevie. Always listens to every episode.
Yep.
We already said Ronnie. I know Nathan Amerson listens sometimes.
Ronnie even posted it on her Instagram story.
Nuh-uh.
Yeah. So
Ronnie, thank you so much.
The community.
Wow, yeah. Ronnie, thank you. And then another excellent listener on our YouTube. Her name is, I believe it's Myrna because that's what her YouTube name is. And she's a faithful listener and she has a question I want to ask. We can discuss.
Yeah.
And then I know we kind of briefly talked about it before the pod, but we have some resources as well.
Totally.
But Myrna asked the question, what is your, and this goes on our last episode about demonic possession and stuff like that. What is your opinion about watching horror movies such as The Exorcist, The Conjuring, etc.? Could you touch on that in the next episode? So before we talk about external resources, what are your initial thoughts, Bryce?
Personally, I don't like horror movies.
Like in general, like is there like a line between like Cabin in the Woods versus like demonic stuff?
Oh dear, not for me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some stuff like A Quiet Place where it's like
It's like that line between suspense and horror.
Yeah. And I think that stuff's okay. I enjoy that stuff. But the true like horror stuff, like I don't know, like Saw, Paranormal Activity, like The Conjuring, all that stuff. I just don't like. I don't personally like.
Yeah.
But as believers, that's a really good question.
It is.
I think.
Fun fact while you're thinking.
Yeah.
When Paranormal Activity came out, the original.
Okay.
I was going to see, oh gosh, I don't forget what movie it was. Maybe it was a Batman movie or something like that. And it was sold out. And so I was like, oh, I still want to go to the movies. Mm-hmm. And so the only other option at that time was Paranormal Activity. And I saw it, I think it was one of the opening weekends in the front row. Like front row as in like no one's sitting in front of you where your head's like, you know, cranked all the way back. And so I experienced Paranormal Activity no more. I do not recommend it. I'm a wuss for those things too. I was terrified.
Yeah. I just think that's such an interesting question. I mean, for starters, like it is a movie.
Yeah.
So like the things that are happening in the movie aren't, I don't even want to say they're not real. Because like if you're playing with a Ouija board in a movie, you know.
Yeah.
I think it all comes down to like, I don't know. I feel like I don't really have a robust like theological argument for why you should or shouldn't watch horror movies. But I think I would just go back to like, is it beneficial to you in your walk with Jesus?
Yeah.
If not, maybe don't watch it.
I think for sure it's a level of discernment. I don't think you could be legalistic and just say it's evil. I would say, in my personal opinion, I find some of the content fairly disturbing. Yeah. As in how it normalizes demonic activity, where I think that is dangerous. Like, and I think with film, when I was in Bible college, someone talked about this. We actually went to see Blue Like Jazz when it was in the theaters back in over a decade ago, and film I think has more. And I would be curious on your opinion of this as a film guy, but I think it has more of a window into our life than we think it does. Like when we watch the content, I think it is teaching us more than we think. Even if it's like, I don't know, it's not like we're going to learn, but the content that you consume, I think it changes the way that you think in ways. Yeah. And sometimes it's just like, it's unseeable. You don't see it, or you can't see it in your mind, but it happens. You know what I mean? And so the thing about the exorcism, stuff like that, one, I think it puts like a Hollywood stamp on demonic activity. And one, I believe demonic activity is real. So that's a little sketchy right there. And two, it kind of like glorifies, like, look how cool this is. You know, you can go in and, you know, take out a demon. And I've listened to some podcasts of guys who do demonic, what's it called? Exorcisms. Yeah. And from what they have said, and you know, take it as a grain of sand. Is that the correct terminology? I think
it's grain of salt.
Grain of salt. Thank you. You saved me the second time. But his input was, hey, I've seen demons in people, and it's a long process to get the demons out. It's not like a Hollywood like floating over the bed, you know, like convulsing, you know, stuff like that. But I do think you should just be careful with what you consume, because I think what you consume comes out in your everyday life. Yeah.
I also think I think there needs to be an awareness of like understanding what you're watching. Cause I agree. I think film overall, I think across the board, film changes you. Yeah. You know, there's a lot of things that at like a subconscious level, I think change how you think. Yeah.
Which is crazy. I don't know if you've done any, this is going down like conspiracy kind of a rabbit trail.
Let's do it.
But the CIA's relationship with Hollywood, or like the government's relationship, where like back when they were recruiting for, I don't know if it was World War II, but you can just see, like, if you watch film that glorifies, let's say, being in the army or whatever, something like that, obviously it's going to be like, what it teaches you is, oh, this is great. And so on that same level, it's more of, I do think as Christians, we should probably, and this is convicting for myself, just be more aware, as you said, of the content that we consume. Because in the same way, it's like you become who you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
I think we know that phrase is in like a friendship level with the people you spend your time with, but I think it's similar to the content that we consume.
Yeah.
So even like Stranger Things, which was one of the most popular shows on the planet, which it probably still is. It starts out here, but then it always goes to like a demonic place. And even go like the detective shows and CSI and Bones and stuff. It seems like it always just goes demonic. It's like they're like, oh, this, you gotta mix it up or something. I don't know. Where else do we go except for demonic?
I mean, I think it's really interesting. You know, there's like those shows like Law and Order SVU and CSI and Criminal Minds and all that stuff.
Yeah, Criminal Minds was talking about. It goes demonic.
Yeah. I think there is some. I feel like an interesting piece about them is you are introducing. You know, like somebody didn't just sit down and like Criminal Minds, for example. Somebody didn't just sit down and like make that up. You know, they're pulling that from like, I think, I'm gonna get this wrong, but there's like
Ronnie will correct you if you are.
Yeah. There's something like it's like 100 to 150 active serial killers
in the planet
in North America at any given time. Yeah.
That's so terrifying.
But so then I feel like something like Criminal Minds gives context to like, hey, this is something that happens that you don't see, you know, which I think there is something to be said for that. I think some people live like happy-go-lucky, like rainbow unicorn lives, but don't realize that there are terrible things that happen in the city that they live in. I mean, even just down to like homelessness or human trafficking or, you know, the foster system or, you know, just people in your community that are going through hard times that you don't necessarily see. So I think there is that aspect of it too, of like, you know, there are violent crimes and things that happen that, but I don't think it's good to like glorify it. Like an entire TV show that's like think about Law and Order SVU. Every single episode is like a terrible tragedy. And it's like, and it's an insanely popular TV show that's on season like, I want to say like 16 or something.
It's going to go on forever.
And you're like, how does this keep, like, how do it, I just don't think it's good for us to like be like, oh yeah, I love Law and Order SVU. You're like, no, nobody should love the content of this show. Like, granted, there's a lot of times there is, you know, redemption or something, but a lot of times there's not redemption, you know? So it is a weird, like, why do we like these things so much?
So did you ever watch the show Dexter?
I did, yeah.
Shows like that's like this dude is a serial killer, and it's basically glorifying serial killers.
And
it's
like, but it's okay because he only kills people who deserve
it. Yeah, it's crazy. All right, so here's
cue forgiveness.
Hey, we are going to talk about bitterness and forgiveness, and actually, maybe this is a good segue because on Sunday we talked about the parable of the unforgiving debtor, and how kind of anger and bitterness corrupts us. Mm-hmm. Do you think, as we're talking about, you know, film, and video games even we can talk about.
Yeah.
Do you think that leads to more violence in our country? Like, because, I mean, I don't know the stats, like if we become more violent. Yeah. But there's some debate, you know, just even how like video games and stuff like that. Do you think leads potentially to an increase in gun violence and violence in schools and stuff like that, or even like the TV shows? Like it gives allowance to it, like we said, like the content that you consume. Sometimes it changes you without even realizing it. Yeah, it's so interesting. I remember they were filming a movie or maybe it was a series or a movie called Rust. In the desert of like New Mexico. Was that the one when they shot someone? Alec Baldwin. Yeah, when he shot someone like a camera person. Yeah, shot the cinematographer and the director. And then afterwards, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, came out and said, we are not going to use real firearms on set anymore. Yeah. Only going to use like fully mock weapons. Yeah.
And I just thought that was such an interesting thing to come out and say of like, hey, we're still going to do violence in our movies,
But rubber guns.
but we're only going to use rubber guns.
And then we'll do it in all in post.
we'll just do it all in post.
Yeah.
I just thought it was really interesting of like, well, like commendable for safety, 100%. But I think there's still this question of like, well, why do we have so many movies where you're shooting people?
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
I just think there are a lot of studies that look at like, well, is Call of Duty like increasing violence in children? And I don't know if it's, and a lot of them are, I feel like they're always one way or the other, or they're inconclusive. But I remember I was interviewing a teenager. Mm-hmm. I can link the video if people want to watch it. I mean, he's had a super, super rough upbringing, but absolutely awesome kid. Very talented, very, very introspective. Just really, really good kid. And he was talking about like the life that he grew up in. And he was recanting the story about how, you know, he was looking out his bedroom window and there was this, like a guy and a girl with, you know, a kid in a stroller, and they were having some disagreement, and the guy just like pulled out a beer bottle and like broke it over the girl's head.
It's awful.
And he's like, to me, that was just like a normal thing. Like you would like, I'm like, if I saw that, I'd be like, what?
Yeah.
You know, I got to do something. He's like, I mean, that was just like a normal thing that just happened. And so I don't know that, you know, video games and like the stuff that happens in TV, if it's increased violence per se, but I definitely think it's normalized it.
Or desensitized.
Or desensitized,
Yeah.
you know? And I think that, like even, I'm sure a lot of people have seen in the news the last couple of days that Israel declared war on Hamas after a pretty horrendous attack from Hamas. And I mean, I've seen it all over the place, you know, in the news the last few days. And it took like probably 4 or 5 news articles before I realized like 100 people were killed in that attack, over 100 people. And you're just like, man, we have become so desensitized.
It's like a Tuesday news source.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, Tuesday, and the next day something new.
Yeah. And I was just like, oh my goodness. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's like, you know, you play Call of Duty and you're like, how many people did I kill? You know, like you're judged on
Seriously.
how well you do at killing people. And I think that's just not how God designed us.
Yeah.
You know, I think back to, you know, early Genesis where God's having this conversation with Cain. He's like, Cain, sin is crouching at the door.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel like, I just feel like sin is just crouching all over the place now, you know,
Yeah.
of like violence is just everywhere.
It's so interesting. Again, tying this back into film is, I believe it was Gone with the Wind was the first curse word in film ever.
Wow.
In the United States, right? Am I correct?
I had
Do you
no
know?
idea.
Because I
That's
think
really
I think he says, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a D word," and I
Yeah.
think that was the first because it was like a super like no, like you don't do that, so it caused a
Yeah.
huge controversy.
Yeah.
Hence why I think it's the most profitable movie of all time.
Whoa.
Compared to, I think it's better more so than Avatar. It made so much money.
Interesting.
Yeah, you should research that a little bit.
Yeah.
Ronnie, correct me if I'm wrong.
We don't want Ronnie to be known as the person who corrects
That's
us.
true. Okay, sorry, Ronnie.
She does know a lot though.
And so, but just to see, I believe Gone with the Wind came out. Oh gosh, I'm gonna butcher this. The 50s, I want to say, maybe
58. Let's look it up.
something like that. Yeah, in the 50s. But anyways, so fast forward to now, it's it has just changed.
39.
1939. God, yeah, I was way off. I knew it was. I don't know if it's black and white because I think I've seen a color version, but they could have done one of those things when they redo it and release a colored version.
Yeah.
But anyways, but to see how much now it's almost been 100 years. How much we have changed since then, where it was a controversy to have the D word in a movie, and now I think even PG movies have the D words is almost like a.
It's just not
whatever.
anymore.
And I'm not whatever the view on curse words is, but it's more of just to see how much we have changed as a society.
Yeah.
And how it's you start here, and even with violence, now you see more and more violent movies where instead of like just seeing people die, they do like CG blood splatters, it's like, and that's probably a terrible sound effect to listen to, but, or like 300 when that came out. I remember that was a big deal.
Yeah.
Because how violent, and you could like see the more gore and kind of the blood. And
it is, oh man. Yeah. It's just so, I totally lost my train of thought.
well, it's just,
Yeah.
I mean, do we glorify violence? And then the other funny thing is, for some reason, Christians are okay with violence in movies. And the question, like, is that okay? I don't know. I don't know if I have an opinion on that, but it was just kind of funny because Christians are like, rated R movies, that's bad. But then if it's like, oh, rated R for violence, we're like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Like if it's rated R for like nudity, you can't do that.
Big no.
But violence, that's okay.
Yeah.
Which it is, man, I feel like this is just such a deep rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Because then you start talking about like, there's violence all over the Old Testament. Like
that's what I was going to say.
Wars,
I just read the story in Judges this morning of the lady who throws a millstone on Abimelech's head and it crushes his skull.
Yeah.
It's like, dang.
Or who drove the tent stake through someone's head?
Oh, yeah, that was, I just read that the other day too.
Not Rahab.
No. Yeah, the oh gosh, I'm not going to remember, but yeah. It's a tent stake straight to the dude's temple.
Yeah.
While he's sleeping.
Yeah, you're just like, where'd that, like, turn that into a movie?
Yeah.
Like, I think it is like, I think it's always really important to keep keep a pulse on like, how is this thing affecting me?
I think that's it. Yeah.
But I think that's true with music and with people. Like we were talking before this of like, I've been listening to a lot of Red Hot Chili Peppers lately.
Yeah.
I think they're amazing musicians and they have a pretty extensive discography.
I like Anthony Sudeikis', that's not his name, is it?
Anthony Kiedis.
His singing voice is so fantastic.
Dude, it's so good.
It's because he like speaks it.
Yeah.
Give it away, give it away, give it away now.
Yeah.
It's good.
I love that guy.
Yeah.
He's got I like his voice.
They're talented musicians.
Yeah, very talented musicians, very storied past. But I think, it's keeping your pulse on like how is this thing affecting me?
Yeah.
Like I don't think listening to Red Hot Chili Peppers is bad, but if I'm like not working and just constantly researching Red Hot Chili Peppers and like laying on the floor listening to, that's not good.
Yeah.
It's
the discernment because like I think, man, I have the view that we as a society and as people typically overcorrect. Mm-hmm. And so in the 90s, this was a little bit before my time. It was probably my sisters who were a couple years older than me. But they used to have like a purity culture, like CD burning parties and stuff like that. Let's burn all of our secular CDs, only listen to Christian. And it's like, okay, that seems like it's probably a little bit too far.
Yeah.
I mean, not probably. That's definitely too far.
Yeah.
And maybe it's more of like, okay, let's just use discernment. Maybe let's have a balance.
Yeah.
Maybe the purity culture kind of thing is not going to be beneficial. And maybe that's more legalistic in.
Right. Well, even that's funny you mentioned that with CD burning. I'm teaching this class I'm teaching an elective for one of the DTSs at YWAM Salem.
Yeah.
And it's on documentary film. And all the films, I'm asking them to watch a handful of films, but I'm not asking them to watch any Christian documentaries. Mm-hmm. Because hot take.
Oh, snap. Here we go.
But they're not usually very good.
Yeah.
Like maybe like the story is good and people are like, oh my gosh, like people are being saved and all this stuff. But when you compare it to like the documentaries that are winning Academy Awards, that maybe they're not faith-based, but they're beautiful stories of, people going into other countries and doing aid or like something like that. Like they're just really, really good. And a lot of Christian documentaries aren't so good. So it's been an interesting thing of like, well, I don't think it's beneficial to us as believers to just throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because my point with that is like, hey, I don't want you guys to make good Christian films. I want you guys to make good films. Because if you make a good film, then anybody will want to watch it.
Yeah.
If you make a good Christian film, Christians will want to watch it, and that's cool. But like, I want you to make films that everybody wants to watch. So we're gonna watch the films that everybody likes to watch.
Yeah.
I
think that's why The Chosen's been so popular. Yeah. Because it's like the Dallas Jenkins, who actually started in Hollywood. Or maybe not started, but he made a movie called Gavin. Oh gosh, I don't remember the title right now, but he made a Hollywood movie. It kind of flopped.
Yeah.
And then he got some work and figured out how to do The Chosen, and then kind of turned his career around with that. But The Chosen, the reason it's popular is because it's actually well done.
Oh yeah.
It's actually entertaining to watch, and like the acting is good. It's not cheesy for the most part.
Yeah. It's like the like Fireproof and Bulletproof.
Facing the Giants.
Facing the Giants. It's like those aren't.
They do make me cry every time though, because I'm just a sucker for those types of movies.
Oh yeah.
But the acting is atrocious.
But it's like you watch it and you're like, there's a reason we're not in the Academy Awards for these.
Yeah.
You know, like, but The Chosen, you're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Like
the cinematography work is beautiful. The acting is really excellent.
It's like they're using great cameras. It's like a decent budget film. Like they're using like, you know, they're making a movie, you know, and they're focusing on making a movie. And I think Brooke reminds me of this all the time because, Brooke has her master's in violin performance. So she's grown up with art her whole life. I studied math. And so my version of like perfection was very objective. Like you either got the right answer or you didn't. Where with art, it's always very subjective, you know? And one thing that Brooke has always reminded me of is like, God appreciates it when we make good things, you know, like he's a creator who created the world and it was good, you know? So he like, I think, especially the God who gave us the talents and the gifts that we have, he likes it when we use those to make beautiful things, you know?
Yeah.
So
I'm fully on board with that.
So I think there is I don't think we have to get into it right here, but I think there is a fairly robust theological argument for why it's acceptable to like put a lot of effort into making something beautiful and not just like.
Yeah. Give God your best.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Totally. And I feel that even like as a pastor, there's a pressure, like we have our older church building and stuff like that. And it's a balance of, you know, making sure it's a nice facility, but at the same time, you don't want to put money into something that's like, well, we want to invest in people, you know what I mean? But at the same time,
those gilded faucets.
Yeah, I know. Gold plated. But at the same time, you look in the Old Testament and like the tabernacle and stuff, and like God likes good work. Yeah. And as Brooke said, he likes like quality.
Yeah.
And I think it's about our heart, but it's like he wants your best.
Yeah.
And my best example on that one was oftentimes when people think about church, they think about like, oh, we have a crappy couch. Like, oh, let's give that to the church. Like they could probably use it. And it's like, no one's like, let's give the best that I've got to the church. Yeah. Oftentimes in our culture, at least, church gets whatever I have left.
It's the second hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is the exact opposite of how sacrifice was supposed to work.
Yeah. It's like, oh, sports, church is after that. Yeah. Family stuff, family vacations, church is after that. And listen, I'm all for taking breaks and having sabbaticals. And
we're not saying don't take a Sunday off every day.
Yeah, I'm just saying the priority of church has, you know, it's not there.
Yeah.
It's secondary for maybe not every person, obviously. But for a lot of people in culture, it's like, well, I'll give what I can, you know, and I'm not talking about financially, I'm talking about time.
Yeah.
It's like, I'll sleep in today. Maybe not. You know, here and there. And it's there's just no commitment.
Well, I don't want to volunteer.
For the most part.
I just want to attend. Yeah.
But there are people that are really faithful. I think God, you know, uses them in those situations. And it's fun for me as a leader and pastor to see people grow. Yeah. Because as long as people are growing and maturing in their faith, then I'm a happy camper.
Totally.
Like I don't necessarily care as much, or at least I try not to, of the numbers of people who show up. What I do care about is the people that we do have, if they're growing in their own faith.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Back on that film topic really quick.
Yes.
We'll link in the description. There's a podcast that Steve and I both listen to called Theology in the Raw.
I was listening to it while I was driving your house today. It's a good one.
It's only like 2 minutes to my house.
I know. It's not very many. I didn't listen very much.
With a guy named Preston Sprinkle. And maybe a month or so ago, they had an entire little discussion on kind of arts and film in the church. And they did briefly, for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, talk about horror movies and horror films. And they had an interesting take on it. So we'll link that in the description if you want to dive a little deeper.
Yeah, go listen to that.
Yeah, it was a good conversation. So
listen to it. And continue on this conversation of the violence and stuff like that. On Sunday, we talked about bitterness and anger. And I think oftentimes bitterness and anger leads to violence. And we could go all the way back to Genesis, 3. No, that's way wrong. 7, 8, I don't know. Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could look it up, but Genesis 7 maybe. No, that's wrong too. Find out.
I get so confused in Genesis.
I know. It's because the timeline goes so fast. Anyways, Cain and Abel. Cain eventually murders his brother because of bitterness in his heart. Bitterness leading to violence. And I think as a culture, we have become a very bitter and angry culture overall. And so we lack the ability to forgive those who have offended us. And it potentially leads to violence. So I think the violence in our culture stems from a lot of different areas. We talked about film at the beginning, like, it could be, we're desensitized, which I think there's definitely validity behind that argument. But also I think we're just a very angry and bitter people group right now, for the most part.
Yeah.
Where even we talk about politically, right now you have Republicans versus Democrats, and they do something that the other party doesn't like, and they just demonize one another. And they say, oh, it's your fault, and then something else happens and it's their fault, and it goes back and forth. And there's we have lost the art and the ability to forgive those who have hurt us or even made a mistake.
Yeah.
And I think out of it comes anxiety and tension and bitterness and anger, which leads to violence.
Yeah.
And I think we could really do a lot of good work as a culture if we practice the art of forgiveness. And I will say, as talking about Sunday, forgiveness does not mean you have to be best friends with someone.
No.
I think you can have really healthy and strategic, compassionate boundaries.
I think our culture is super bad at boundaries.
Awful.
Terrible.
Yeah, I'm bad at it.
I'm bad at it, And I think because we do conflate forgiving someone with forgetting.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the phrase, forgive and forget. No. That's,
I would say God doesn't forget our sins either.
No.
Because he's God.
Yeah.
He chooses not to remember or not to hold them over you.
Yeah.
But it's not like, oh, what you did what? No, of course not.
Yeah.
But he still chooses to forgive us.
Yeah.
And I think in our culture, if we practiced forgiveness, a lot of the tension would come down.
Yeah.
But I think it's really hard to do that because I think it begins with, a lot of humility.
And I think there's just this, we live in such a culture where we want revenge.
Yeah.
We want to if somebody harms you, you're like, well, I gotta even this out.
Yeah.
And I just think that's such an unfortunate way to live.
Yeah.
Which I feel like that's why I think Jesus doing it with money, I think, was an interesting way of doing it because it's so it's so analytical. You owe me $1 million and I forgive you. And it's like, oh, okay, we went from $1 million to 0. Now we're good.
Yeah.
But you go through from 1,000 to 0. I'm like, okay, you're good.
Yeah.
So I think that was we just can't we can't let things sit. Even I found it interesting in the whole conversation right now with student loans. Student loan repayment started 1st of October.
It's like $1 trillion.
Praying for all of you.
I think it's more than $1 trillion.
Yeah.
The United States is in student loan debt. It's
Yeah.
like 1 trillion.
And there's just a lot of people saying interesting things there's people that didn't go to school, or there's people that paid for their school as they went, or have already paid off their student loans. And they're like, well, am I going to get my money back? Am I going to get something out of this? And it's like, well, that's not the point. So we just have this or people being like, well, we've given $80 billion to Ukraine. Why couldn't we give that to student loans? So there's just this weird like we don't have the ability to just be like, look at the situation and be like, ooh, that right there, we forgave all the student loans. That's a good thing,
Yeah.
you know, and say like this took a burden off of hundreds, millions of people, you know, not hundreds of millions, millions of people,
Yeah.
you know, and be like, that's a good thing.
All the students today are like, have you read the parable of the unforgiving debtor? Government. Have you? And I mean, there's validity of the argument of like, hey, like, there's nothing that's technically free, right? Like someone's paying for it.
Totally.
And so I think there's discernment in that as well.
Right. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying like there would be no economic impact if the government just highlighted all the student loans and clicked delete. Like
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's no economic impact or whatever. But what I think what I'm saying is like, I think people are like, well, why do they get that and I don't? You know, that's just such a like American like attitude of like, well,
It's not fair.
it's not fair. Yeah. And it's like, well, no, but life's not fair. You know, like,
It's like the argument that God is just, but he's not fair.
yeah.
That's a tough one. What do you think about that? It's like Aslan, the lion from C.S. Lewis, the Chronicles. of
Yeah.
Narnia.
Yeah.
He's not a tame lion.
Yeah.
Is that the line?
I think so.
But he is good.
Yeah. He's just, but not fair. Interesting. I think that's a very human thing to say.
Yeah, it depends on your definition of what fair is. Like, is
Yeah.
fair like everybody gets everything the same
Yeah.
all the time?
Yeah. Like he's got a communist, you know?
I mean, some people would argue, like, why does God not act that way?
Yeah. I think we've talked about this before. I think it all comes down to like, we have agency. We have the ability to make our own choices.
Yeah.
We created this government that we exist in. Like, God didn't send forth tablets that became the Constitution. You know, like we as humans wrote that and wrote in laws, and we've amended and ratified certain things to set this thing up in a certain way. Like we were given first of all, we were given the intelligence to do so. And I think as humans in the image of God, like we have a level of intelligence because there are some wonderful things about how our government and other governments are run.
Sure.
Because we are made in the image of God and we have some level of intelligence. But I also think because we're humans, there are things in the government or just any system of rule that don't work out in everyone's favor all the time or seem to be unjust or unfair. I think I would need to figure out what the definition, what the difference between something being fair and just is.
Yeah.
So I don't.
Yeah, I think it just depends on your definition of fair. I'm not saying I have the answer, but I know that phrase is used fairly. It's like a common phrase.
Yeah.
Like, is God just but not fair? And then what is fair?
Yeah.
And then the balance of the free will and all that stuff. And,
I feel like what people are trying to say is God is fair except when he's not.
yeah.
You know, that's what I hear from that. But I think like if you believe that God is all knowing and all powerful and all loving, you have to, I feel like it's just a way for people to explain away that like God's going to do things that we don't understand, that we're going to be like, oh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course he's going to do that. Of course God's going to do, like the all-knowing, all-powerful entity that is God is going to do things that we as humans don't understand.
Yeah.
And we just have to deal with that.
Yeah.
And be okay with that and know that he works things all good for the purposes of those who love him.
Yeah. Absolutely. So let's just talk about more controversial stuff.
Oh, sure.
So you brought up student loan debt. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's in the benefits of the country, or what do you think are the implications and ramifications if you do forgive all the student? And I don't know if this is biased. Do you have student loan debt?
I do.
Okay,
yeah.
so then just take note that Bryce is fairly biased.
I have student loan debt. Yeah. So I had to start repayment
Oh, dang
last
it.
week.
Oh, sorry, man.
I mean, it's not okay. I guess here's the thing. I'll try and explain all my biases for you guys. So I did 3 years at Shemeketa.
Yeah,
I
which
went-
is a community college.
which
for
is
those of you
community
not in
college.
Salem.
I had kind of a rough. For a while I was double majoring math and physics, and then I decided that was a dumb idea.
Okay. Why'd you think it was a dumb idea? It feels like a great thing to major in.
Well, I'm sure it was. It was just bad for my mental health.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
I was taking like calculus,
Oh my gosh.
physics, and chemistry all at the same
Oh,
time.
that sounds terrible.
I couldn't handle it.
I can't handle this thinking about it.
Yeah, so I dropped out of chemistry. I dropped out of chemistry and then just did.
Yeah.
I almost switched back to physics in my master's, though. It's this close. Anyways, but I was super lucky. I ran a tutoring center at Chemeketa Community College for the 3 years I was there, and that paid for basically half my degree.
Yeah.
And so then I took out student loans to do my last 2 years. So I've gotten away like I feel blessed with that time that I was able to spend working there and like minimize my student loan debt.
Yeah.
What are my thoughts on just paying all of it off? There's people that have way more debt than I do.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, I think some people have like 6 figures in the hole.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I'm also not an economist. So I don't know the full implications of okay, here's where I think the biggest question with student loan debt stuff is. I thought it was interesting when Joe Biden was the Biden administration had an interesting forgiveness package.
It was like 10,000 per person, right?
Approximately, yeah. And then some extra stuff depending on if you had certain grants or if you worked for nonprofits or certain things.
Yeah.
And that was deemed unconstitutional.
By the Supreme Court, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's really interesting. But we've sent an incredible amount of money to Ukraine. Not just Ukraine. We as the United States, we dish out an insane amount of money to foreign aid.
Sure.
Insane amounts of money. And I would easily into the hundreds of billions of dollars.
Oh, I think just this last year was hundreds of billions.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And so it's I feel like that's a really interesting conversation of like, well, do we go help people outside of our borders first? Because I've just like as a thought experiment, again, I'm not an economist, but what happens when you take all of these people in the United States who owe over $1 trillion in student loan debt?
Yeah.
And you wipe that out. That's obviously hard for the economy because you've just taken $1 trillion and deleted it.
Yeah. And mostly it's the schools that are owed that money.
I mean,
or it's private companies who have the loans and
a
all
lot
that
of
stuff.
private companies. The government has some of it.
Debt
as
management
well.
companies. Yeah.
Yeah. But what I think is interesting is, but those people who are paying $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $2,000 a month in student loans, what is that money used for now? Because now you have people, because there's your debt to income ratio is too high, so you can't buy a house. Well, now if that's gone, like now you have more people that are buying houses and more people that are spending money on other things that are driving the economy. Again, I'm not an economist, but I don't think it's good for people, because I think a big conversation, this is a very strange rabbit hole for this podcast, but I enjoy this topic.
Yeah.
Is I think similar to like the medical system, and like the medical system and the university system, I think have a very similar problem.
Oh, interesting. That's an interesting correlation. That they're both astronomically too expensive.
They're too expensive. So people talk about like, well, medical insurance is too high, and the cost of education is too high.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, well, like look at universities. Like I remember when I had got my bachelor's from the University of Memphis and did a bunch of my grad work there. But you looked, and there were more administrative staff at the university than there are professors.
Yeah.
And it's all the upper level administrators are getting salaries in the millions of dollars a year. And you're like, wait a second. While the professors are getting paid like, $70,000, $80,000 a year. And you're like, wait a second. Like the people that are on the ground, like educating in the classroom day in and day out, they're getting paid $70,000, $80,000. And the people who are, like, for lack of better terms, like in the ivory tower, like going around to luncheons and dinners and schmoozing people over, they're getting paid millions of dollars, or like coaches for athletic. They're coaches, college coaches,
They make more money than like
than
anybody.
NFL coaches.
More than NFL coaches,
There are
really?
college coaches that get paid more than NFL
Well, Nick
coaches.
Saban, I'm sure does, but
Yeah. So it's crazy to me that like you can't, to fix the education problem, you have to fix the cost of education. Same as the medical system. I remember I was reading this week that India has a kind of a loophole patent law where if a pharmaceutical company in India wants to pull out a patent to make a medication that is molecularly identical to another medication, they can, as long as they charge less.
interesting.
So there's pharmaceutical companies in India that are making drugs that in the States would cost $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for $175. And they're selling it to the West because people can't afford it.
Yeah.
You want a cancer drug that's $40,000 a dose.
Yeah.
That's why medical insurance is so high, because you have pharmaceutical companies that are charging $40,000 for medicine that you can go to India and get for $175.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's interesting. The reason I asked this to you a long question, and I don't know how I feel about it. I think, again, in my view, I think there's a level of discernment. I don't personally think that wiping everything out all at once is probably beneficial.
No, totally.
Just because there needs to be co-equal responsibility. I think the question I have behind is, why did it cost that much in the first place?
Yeah.
And I think the thing that makes me sad is even private Christian colleges are insanely expensive.
Dude.
Like there's a local one, I will not say its name, but I believe it's,
There's only one local one, Steven.
well, there could be some baby one, a little tiny college. I believe it's like $60,000 a year. But then the question is like, oh, scholarships and stuff. I'm like, well, the question is, why in the world does it cost that much money?
Well, and it's okay. This is interesting because
And it didn't 20, 30 years ago.
my wife went to said Christian
Potentially
college.
a Christian college that's nearby.
And I would always ask the question. I'd be like, because a lot of people go there for education.
Yeah,
Like,
and it's a great school.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying as leaving a private Christian school where like you send if you trained a pastor and say, hey, you get a degree in pastoral ministry or in theology or something, you come out $80,000 in debt and you get a job that pays
$50,000.
if that.
Yeah.
It's like because a starting out pastor, like when I was in ministry and I first started, I was getting paid $100 a week, and I didn't go to like a traditional private Christian school or anything, but it's just I just don't know.
But then it's weird. The thing, we knew, I didn't go to this private Christian school, but we knew a lot of people that did. And I knew
Sure.
a lot of them were coming out with education degrees. I'd be like, why are you going here when you could go across the river to a different public school
That's half as much money.
that's a quarter the cost of going to said private Christian school? And especially because, like, this is just my personality. I went to Oregon State for a year, and I still lived in Salem, so I was commuting like 45 minutes each way a day. And I would like go to my classes, sit around, do some work in the tutoring center, and then come back. And I wasn't very like, I never lived there. I wasn't in community. Like, I was Brooke and I had broken up. We weren't together at the time, but my community was in Salem. Yeah. My community was
But it worked out for you in the end.
It worked out for me in the end.
Married.
But my community was in Salem. And so like I was just going there, finishing my stuff and then coming back. Whereas a lot of them, when they talk about going to this private Christian school, it's very like, they're like, oh, the community there is insane. And a lot of them, like a lot of like Brooke's friends, they've known each other since day one freshman year.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I can't even I can remember one person in my first day of college, but like I don't remember hardly anyone from school, so they had this incredible community that's like that private Christian school has a very robust community in Salem.
Absolutely.
And so
most do, which is why they get students to go
which
there.
I think is great. Yeah. It's like you're in college and it's hard and it's, you're building these relationships that last for a long time.
Yeah.
So
I think that the question is with private Christian schools, is it more about making, and this could be like an overall like problem within culture, and we've talked about this before. everything has to be up and to the right at all times. If it's
Yeah.
not, you're failing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, like, on the educational system, is it more about, hey, we're here to educate people? And if you claim to be a, quote, private Christian school, which means you're hopefully discipling people, and understand, like, in the professional world, there's all the loopholes, all the stuff you have to go through, right? So I'm not negating that fact.
Right.
What I am saying is, if your sole mission is to educate brothers and sisters in Christ, disciple them, and send them into the workforce,
Yeah.
should it be about making profits, or should it be about? I mean, I understand you have to pay. I understand you need
Yeah.
staff, and you need to take care of your facility. So maybe
Yeah.
I'm totally in the wrong here. It's just you used to be able to get an education in the 80s, like when my parents went to private Christian school. They paid, next to nothing compared to what it is now.
Yeah.
And the wages haven't caught up. So it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, it is. I feel like it is. It is a hard topic to discuss, for sure, because it's so nuanced, But I think because I would say the other thing with student loans is, like in my time, like in high school, like there wasn't a question. Like you were applying for schools and you were going to college.
Yeah.
Like that. Like there wasn't really a question about it. That's just what you did. And I think that's extremely detrimental because I'm like looking back, I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics. I am a freelance filmmaker now, like I don't use, granted, like I love having that degree
Yeah.
and we don't need to go into that whole story, but I love having that degree. I don't love the debt that came with it, but, it is a benefit. Going to college taught me a lot of how to learn how to be self-disciplined, like how to network and work with people and ask intelligent questions and all that stuff. But I don't think college is for everyone. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And I think the narrative has changed a lot, and I think especially like we're talking about Shemeketa. Shemeketa has an insanely robust trade program for welding, auto mechanics, and even Salem College Public Schools has CTEC, the Career Technology Education Center, where you can start working in welding or video game design or auto mechanics or
roofing
carpentry.
or everything.
Yeah, before you're even out of high school.
Yeah.
And so I think stuff like that is great.
I do think we value, like, I think you're right. Like when we were in school, when I was in school, it's like college, you have to do it if you want to succeed. And I think college is a wonderful thing for a lot of careers. But as you were saying, like even like the trades and stuff like that, I think we value software development and all that type of stuff, which is cool and it's quote sexy because you work for Google or Facebook and you make a ton of money, but it's like you still need to flush toilets. Like that's a very important thing that needs to happen.
Totally.
So it's like plumbers are and people, because we haven't really talked about those careers and viewed them as like a downgrade. Dude, there's plumbers right now making like six figures.
Dude, plumbers, garbage,
like welders also, because that stuff's
welders,
like you can't go to the bathroom virtually. That's not possible.
No, you're not going to bring in an AI robot.
Exactly, and so and even like construction, all that type of stuff. So I think it's just we've counterbalanced and we viewed that as like, oh, it's a step down. Like you're not an engineer, you're not this, and it's like, well, we need all. Everyone has different giftings.
Well, you know what's
like
crazy? All of those like sexy jobs.
Yeah.
Like software developers, engineers, all that stuff. Those are the jobs that AI is coming for the fastest.
Dude, I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
Wow. And
like all the stuff that's incredibly analytical, like that's the stuff that AI is just like, yeah man, I got this.
Yeah,
like,
AI can't fix a toilet.
No.
It can't fix your shower.
It can design a really good one, but it can't fix it.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. What a turn of events if it changes, like AI ends up taking all of the jobs for the software developers, and then those who are working trade jobs are now like kings of society.
Yeah. Can we take a quick pause? My wife's at the door and she forgot her keys.
Oh, absolutely. Just open up the garage.
heard them pull up, and then I heard my phone go off, and I was like, "Oh, there's probably." Oh man. Chairs are not the most comfortable to sit in
The IKEA chairs.
for an hour straight. The first like 30 minutes, they're pretty comfortable.
Yeah, that's funny.
Okay.
Side note, we're going to have so many clickbaity titles for this podcast. We should just list off everything controversial we talked about.
Student loans.
The student loan forgiveness. We talked about exorcisms at the beginning.
Student loans and exorcisms.
Student loans, exorcisms. We talked about government. We talked about violence.
Ukraine.
We talked about Ukraine. What else? There was something else that was super controversial or something.
Movies.
No, the movie. Yeah, you should just do every controversial topic. Just put it in the thumbnail, or not thumbnail, but in the title.
In the title. Okay, here's an interesting one, and then I've got some talking points for the from the sermon on Sunday.
Okay.
Can Christians be possessed by demons?
Man, off the cuff answer without any type of research, I would say no.
Yeah.
Because if you have Jesus in your heart and the Holy Spirit within you, then I don't think you can have a demon.
Exactly.
I mean, I think that's my quick answer.
That's my quick answer too.
Yeah, because I'm like, I mean, then it goes to the debate though. How do you know if someone's saved or not? And I think only God knows. But I guess if someone's demon possessed, you're like, you're probably not saved.
We need to work on this.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, I think that would be my answer as well. I know that was something that someone had brought up recently, and I was
really?
like, yeah, that's a really good point. I guess I can't be demon possessed. That's cool. That's like a nice like.
That's cool.
Like listing the benefits of following Jesus. Like can't be demon possessed. That would rank. I mean, it'd be like salvation, relationship with God. Can't be demon possessed.
Can't be demon.
If somebody wants my top 3.
Wow. But I still think you have temptations, obviously, from demonic activity. Or, I mean,
100%.
demons, but like
spiritual warfare.
I would say, I don't know if this has ever happened to you. Have you ever had any like spiritual, like physical battles like that you've experienced? Because I've had a couple.
Like physical battles?
So there's been a few times in my life, and I don't know if this is just like, I've believed this to be like a spiritual attack, like a spiritual world type deal, but I could be wrong. But there's been a few times when I have woken up in the morning or like in the middle of the night and I'm awake, but I cannot physically move my body. Like I feel like someone's holding me down.
Oh, I have sleep paralysis like that.
Was that what is sleep paralysis? Because it's only happened to me a couple times.
I get it probably twice a month.
Are you serious?
I hate it so much. Like
is that the definition of what it is?
Sleep paralysis. I've had it ever since I was a kid. I've had it.
Oh,
I should
maybe
probably
it's
go
not
see
spiritual then.
I should probably see a doctor.
I should probably see
I don't know. But a handful of times for me though, at least it is like linked with weird dreams or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. And then the last thing I'll say is one time as a kid, I had a dream that there was a terrifying black dog with bright red eyes that was in the window, and it smashed through my window. And it was the most real dream I've ever had in my entire life.
Whoa.
And now as an adult, I reflect back and I'm like, I don't think that was a normal dream. Like, I feel like there's some spiritual level to that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
Because I still remember it very clearly. And I still remember the image of like this dog and stuff. And it could have been just a dream. Who knows? But
Yeah. Weird.
anyways, all right, hit me. Start with
Okay.
stuff. So we talked about bitterness. We talked about this in the pod, but bitterness, unforgiving.
I mean, this is just such an interesting parable because it sounds normal when you read it, but then you're like, oh, this is crazy. Like the king is like, you owe 10 million or you owe $1 million. I'm going to forgive you. And that's $1 million is a lot. That's a lot of money.
It was 10,000 shekels, which is millions, a ton of money.
Yeah. So that's crazy. But then he goes up to someone who owes him $1,000 and is like, you need to pay right this second.
Yeah.
And he doesn't, and he throws him in jail. And it's just so like, you're like, wow, that guy's a jerk. And you're like, yeah, but that's us.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Of like, I feel like that's the student loan thing of like, the government forgives your student loans. And then you're like, Hey, Steve, you owe me $20.
Well, dude, I guarantee you that would happen. It's like, 100%. But I think that's, again, as the parable, I think is a correlation to our life where God has forgiven us, so we're to forgive others. But I think forgiveness has power. And what I was going to say earlier, because this is another good tagline for our controversial, stuff in the description for the video. Do you think, or I think it would go so far in healing this country, and I'll use both sides as an example. If Joe Biden, if Joe Biden said, hey, you know what? Donald Trump has done a lot of stuff, and he's really hurt this country and blah, blah, whatever your belief is. But I just want you guys to know that I forgive him and I hold nothing against him. But vice versa.
What if he pardoned him?
Or
presidential pardon?
Dude, that would be crazy. But like on the Donald Trump side, if Donald Trump said, I've been treated very poorly by by the other side, and I don't think that it has been fair. But I forgive all the pain that they've caused. I can't do a good Donald Trump impression, but if he said, I forgive all the pain that they've caused me and my family and stuff, and I hold nothing against them.
Yeah.
I don't know if either of the followers of either of those political people would know what to do with that.
Yeah.
They would be like, wait. We're not attacking or demonizing, because if we're straight, most of the time Donald Trump's kind of, he likes pulling the punches.
Yeah.
And he's got the nicknames for everybody, and it's like he did this, they did this, it's the witch hunt, blah blah blah, all this stuff, and who knows how much validity is in those conversations, but it's I think forgiveness has power. Where if either side on those ends in that political spectrum, if there's forgiveness on either side of just like, hey, maybe you'd have some boundaries, as we talked about, compassionate boundaries, like, hey, this behavior is not acceptable, whatever, whoever. I'm not making it political. I'm just saying that if our leaders led with compassion and forgiveness, I think that would trickle down to all of society.
Yeah.
When right now it's more of like, let's just beat the bejeebers out of each other. Yeah. And try to cram each other's view on each side. And then you see so clearly bitterness, anger, unrighteous, I would say unhealthy anger. Because I think anger is a natural, healthy emotion. But I think it goes too far. Yeah. And there's a lack of forgiveness.
Yeah, that would be incredible.
It would be nuts though.
Yeah.
And also it's good for the tagline, Donald Trump and forgiveness.
I don't think we want to be known as that podcast.
I know. It's true.
No, I think, okay, here's an interesting thing though. Can you, let me make sure I ask this question the right way.
Okay.
Can you forgive? I feel like this is a good segue into this question. Okay. Can you forgive and seek justice at the same time?
Absolutely. I don't see why not. Again, I think forgiveness is less about, it's not giving allowance to someone else's behavior. I think it is more about your heart. And I think that's part of the line of we feel like we can't forgive, because if we do forgive someone, it's saying that their behavior was okay. Yeah. And I don't think that's what we're saying with forgiveness. Yeah. I think it's like, let's use the crazy example of if someone, I don't know, gets killed by a drunk driver and it's a family member of yours. You can forgive someone, but still say, you will never drive ever again. Yeah. Like that is for the safety of other people on the road, Yeah. And I think you can still forgive someone, but then pursue justice and say, like, this is what you did was not okay, but I forgive you. I'm not letting that root of bitterness in my heart, because it corrupts you as a person. It's not about them, it's about you. Right. I think when it comes to the line of forgiveness.
No, I think it's good. I think it's true. I think because I feel like we've grown up with that saying, forgive and forget. So I was like, well, if I forgive this person, then I can't hold them accountable, or I can't seek justice, or, seek restitution. But that's not the case. Like, you can be like, hey, like, you wronged me, I forgive you for that. Yeah. But you still totaled my car, and you need to pay for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's not, again, giving allowance, being like, hey, that's a great example. You crashed into my car. It's $5,000 in damage. Like, hey, we all make mistakes. I forgive you, but I still need you to give me your insurance information.
Which
You can't just drive away and be like, see you later.
But I think that's the big confusion that people have is they conflate they confuse forgiving the person with forgiving the action.
Yeah.
Which we're called to forgive people, and I think that's the funky thing that happens in this story is you have the king that forgives the $1 million debt, which is good, and then goes back and he goes in prison, and then the end of the story is the guy who owed the $1 million ends up getting sent to jail to be tortured, because of his actions. But I think we confuse forgiving the person and forgiving the action of what
As in,
happened.
like, you're not giving validity that the action was okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that, that's the challenging part. And I was using the Joe Biden, Donald Trump illustration mostly as like kind of a funny thing. But really from any political leader, like any side, if people led with that kind of humble heart in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, in our local government, all that stuff, then I think it would be a net. I know it'd be a net positive for our culture,
Totally.
and for our society.
Because I think we need you need the upper hand. So like, oh, we're gonna charge this person with all these things, and throw shade on their campaign.
Yeah.
Because we need the upper hand.
Yeah, and then it's like, oh, it doesn't look strong in like a political campaign to forgive someone and lead from a humble heart.
Yeah.
Because then people are like, oh, that person's not strong enough leader. When I think it is more challenging to forgive than to, hold a grudge or become bitter. That's the easy road.
Yeah.
The easy road is to kind of like, tighten your fists and say, this person, did so many wrongs against me and we're going to make him pay for it, which is not all political candidates, but it seems like that's how they kind of fuel their campaigns that's how they get donations.
Yeah.
We're going to stick it to the other side, or we're going to do this instead of
I'm
like,
gonna
hey,
get behind that.
yeah. And someone's like, I'll give to that. No one's going to, sadly, someone, at least not yet, someone that says, hey, let's work on really forgiving one another.
Yeah.
And treating each other with honor and respect. There's not going to be any big donors opening up their wallets like, I'll give to that campaign, So it's just sad how I think bitterness and the anger and unhealthy anger has really been prevalent in our society for decades.
Yeah.
And social media has made that 10 times worse.
Oh, totally. I mean, so when do you think it's appropriate to seek justice, and when is it appropriate to
Just let it go.
do the Christian thing and let it go or turn the other cheek, as Jesus may say?
Yeah.
It's a very confusing thing that Jesus says.
That is, or it says like if your enemy says run 1 mile, run 2.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about this a lot, but I think it's just a level of discernment from the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Then you have to know, depend on the situation. Because I think there's some things when it's like, you can just let it go. Like, just don't think about it. You don't need to pursue anything.
Yeah.
And you let God be the judge in the end.
Yep.
And I think there's other things when it's like, okay, that's something you probably need to pursue, even though it's hard, for abuse situations and stuff like that. Like it's not safe for the other person to be continue doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're harming people.
Totally.
And that's not okay.
I think that's a big thing. And I think like the car crash example is an interesting one because in Oregon, you have to have insurance,
Yeah.
And B, I think too, that's like man, you hit my car. It's a big inconvenience, and I think it leads to like, like this parable that we're talking about, like the forgiving of the $1 million. Like there's a lot in that, this person has servants and all these other things. So that $1 million debt like affects a lot of his life. And same thing with this guy that owes 1,000, that affects a lot of things. And I think that's really true with what we're talking about here is that, when do you seek forgiveness and when do you seek justice and when do you just decide to let it go? I think just because you forgive someone doesn't mean, again, that they're not responsible for like the fallout of their actions. you know? And so I think in some circumstances, I think you do need to hold people accountable and say like, look, I forgive your actions. Like you, the person, like I forgive you. Like I want to, you know, move to a place of reconciliation, but I still need you to be accountable for what you did.
Yeah.
You know, for how you affected me and my family, or me and, you know, my community and the people around me. You know, I think that's an important piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I fully agree. And I think again, that's why it's discernment piece, because there could be a scenario where you get into a fender bender and maybe God's call in your heart is to say, you know, it's fine. And you forgive them and you say we're just going to move on, whatever. I don't know. Yeah. I think it could be, it's not like 100% of the time you have to demand, you know, this every time. I think there's the level of discernment of you have to listen to the Holy Spirit, which is why it's so important to slow down and go. We got to throw it in there.
It's important to slow down, watch Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, slow down, watch Lord of the Rings, go to Costco. Now, because then you don't want to make a decision when you're anxious if you can.
Yeah.
You don't want to be reactive.
Yeah.
You want to be able to have a healthy discernment in what you think needs to be done.
But I think, I mean, a big part too, I think, is going back to the car example. Someone hits your car. So like for me, like I need my car, like most people need their car to get to and from work or something.
Yeah.
Someone hits my car and totals my car. I'm going to forgive that person. Like, you know, maybe they're having a bad morning, or, you know, they were late to getting their kids to school, or they were late to work or something, and they made a poor decision, and, you know, my car ended up bearing the brunt of that. I forgive you, but I still need a car to get to work.
Yeah.
You know, and like I don't have infinite income to just go like, you know what? I forgive you. I'll just go buy a new car. That's fine.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's something we need to remember is like, hey, someone wrongs you, and now like there are implications to your community for that. And I think that's something you got to keep in mind, is that there are certain circumstances where, like, you know, something happens and, you know, maybe someone makes you late and you miss a train or something, and you're like, oh, that's fine. I'll just jump on the next one. Like, it's no big deal. But there are instances where like someone wrongs you and it's like, okay, I have to go through this process of forgiving this person, but like, it's not always best to just say like, all right, well, this, you know, really crappy situation that I'm in now, I'm just going to suck it up because I forgave them.
Yeah.
You know, like
I think that's the level of having the healthy boundaries. And my mentor calls it compassionate boundaries, where it's like, hey, you hit my car. Here's the deal. I forgive you 100%. Doesn't change the way I view you as a person.
Yeah.
But the boundary is, you did hit my car, and so I need you to give me your insurance information so we can fix this, you know, restoration kind of a deal. And I was talking with a guy after church on Sunday, and we were just reflecting on how challenging it is to draw those lines, those boundaries, compassionate boundaries, because sometimes people blame you that it's your fault. So let's say, like, for instance, if you're in you have a relative, family member, friendship where, let's say Bryce is choking on his tea. Let's say that they have, let's just use this example. Let's say somebody that hangs out with your family, let's say you have little kids, and let's say they curse like a sailor.
Yeah.
And you eventually have to have a conversation around your kids, and you're like, oh, I've made a decision as a parent that at this stage of my children's life, like I don't want to have people just dropping the F-bomb every other sentence around my kids. This is a random example.
Yeah.
And then you would have a conversation and say like, hey, like, I know you maybe you're not aware of this, but you used a lot of this language around my kids, and it's not something my family and I have decided that like we want to keep our kids away from that, hearing that stuff at this point in their life. You forgive them all the times before, but if they continue to come back and listen and they don't honor your request in your home, continue to drop the F-bomb, then eventually you have to draw those boundaries.
You can't be in my home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to say like, hey, here's the deal, man, or when whoever it is, we decided that we think it's best to keep our kids away from this type of language at this point in their life.
Yeah.
And so if you choose to continue to use that language, you will not be welcome in this home.
Yeah.
So that's a compassionate boundary where now it puts the responsibility on them. But then the question is, if they are like, well, you never have me home you never have me over, or like, why, whatever. And it's like, well, that responsibility is on you. Like, you can come over anytime, but if you use this language, you are not be allowed in this house.
Yeah. Well, and I think the interesting piece here is like there's nothing that's unreasonable about that.
Yeah.
You know, but it's people don't like being held accountable.
Yeah.
And I think it's really just that. People don't like being held accountable.
Yeah.
It's like, you know what you should do in these situations. Like, you know how you should treat people. You know what you should have done. But you don't want, because it's inconvenient to you. And I mean, the language thing is, this
is a hypothetical example. It could be for anything, though.
Totally. It's like you know, your kids are playing baseball or whatever, and you throw a ball through your neighbor's window. Like, that's inconvenient to buy your neighbor a new window. You know, and it's like, oh, well, you know, you've got your homeowner's insurance. You know, it's like just do the right thing.
Yeah.
And
it's being responsible.
Yeah.
Taking responsibility for your own actions while also honoring and respecting others' beliefs, even if they're different than yours. So like in the cursing example, you would, if they say, the person who curses says, well, you've cut off from me, it's your fault, you never want to hang out with me. And then the response would be, no, that's not true. We'd love to hang out with you, but we will not hang out with you if you continue to use the language around our children.
Yeah.
And then it puts responsibility on them. And the hard thing is, they might say it's your fault, but the reality is it's their choice to continue to use that language.
Yeah.
And you could say, like, you can come over anytime, man. But if you continue to scream the F-bomb every other sentence, or with my 5-year-old, then
exactly,
you're not welcome here. You
yeah.
know? And then that puts the responsibility where it belongs.
Yeah.
And then if they choose not to, then that's on them. And sadly, they would choose to use that language rather than spending time with you as a friend. Yeah. So the question is it really a friend you want in your life anyways?
Yeah. Yeah. And then it comes down to values. Like, do you value money more than relationships?
Yeah.
Do you value your language more than relationships?
Yeah.
You know, I think that's a huge thing. And that has serious implications, you know, when you value other things above God, other things above people, other things above,
Yeah. Which is why I think the last, especially COVID years, was why there's so much, division in the country, because a lot of people were making those boundaries for themselves.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not having people in my home here, masks here, all that type of stuff. And depending on I don't care on your view on either one.
Yeah.
But it's just
masks are dumb.
Yeah.
You're
some people,
dumb.
Yeah. It's like, you wear that around my house, you're evil, or whatever, stuff like that. Some people had all these a variety of beliefs, but they were drawing a lot of lines, and sometimes people chose lines that make me sad.
Yeah.
As a human being,
totally.
As a follower of Jesus, where it's like,
it is,
But again, you have to respect them and say, like, hey, if you choose to make that line, that's fine.
Yeah.
And that was just a random example from then, but you do it today as well.
Totally.
And I think I do think those healthy boundaries obviously are very important. And as you said, I think most people are pretty awful at them.
Yeah.
Especially people pleasers.
Totally. Oh, I'm bad at them.
I know, it's like,
totally.
I can't, because for us, building the boundaries, saying no, or it's making somebody upset at us. But the reality is it's just a really healthy boundary. It's not slander. It's not being stubborn. Yeah. This is my conviction, and I'm holding to my principles. And I think what we want to do as humans and as Christians is we want to do what we can to maintain our biblical Christ-like principles.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to draw those healthy lines, even though it's really hard.
I agree. It is hard.
Yeah.
Man.
We didn't even talk about Costco one time this whole episode.
Oh. Yeah, forgiveness is such an interesting topic. You know, I meant to look up how many times it's used in the New Testament.
It's a lot, huh?
And I didn't, but it is all over the place.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, I really think we're starting off on the back foot, because growing up with this that phrase of like forgive and forget. I think we've grown up with a really poor theology of forgiveness,
Sure.
which is a bummer.
Or you think about what Jesus says. This is really terrifying for people. If you do not forgive others, he says, my Father will not forgive you. That is crazy.
Yeah. That's like those verses in scripture where, you know, like it's all rainbows and unicorns. And then you read a verse like that and you're like, excuse me?
Yeah. Like, yo.
Yeah.
Like, this is from the mouth of Jesus. He says,
Yeah.
if you do not forgive others,
Yeah.
my Father will not forgive you.
Yeah.
Like, do we understand the implications and the reality of what that means?
Well, and I think there's this, you know, going back to that like forgive and forget mentality. I think there's this, and I think the church does this too, of where someone's like working through, because it's not just like a flip of a switch of like, oh, you hit my car, I forgive you. It's like, no, like you're angry, you're frustrated. Like it's not like an instantaneous like, oh, gotta forgive this. You know, like it takes time and prayer and
Yeah, then you feel shame for your anger when anger is like our built-in natural response to things.
God gets angry.
Yeah.
You know, and it's up to us how we respond in that anger, but anger itself isn't a bad emotion.
Yeah.
Which like I grew up with like, don't be angry. Like anger is perfectly healthy.
Yeah.
Like if somebody breaks into my house and tries to harm my family, I will be angry at you and that is a good thing.
Yeah.
And you will feel my wrath and that is a good thing because you don't break into people's house, you know.
Yeah.
And I think something that a lot of people struggle with is that when you forgive and don't forget, like there's this, you know, I think there's this pressure from the outside of like, oh, well, you didn't forgive that person. Like God calls you to forgive. And you're like, no, like I forgive them, but like I need a car, you know, or they took money from me, you know, or something where it's like, well, like, yeah, sure, you know, God will. And then I think the other big thing that people do is like, well, God is the final judge. And you're like, yes, he is. But there are numerous times, especially in the Old Testament, where God deals with things right there in the moment when they happen. And I think that can still happen today. And there are certain instances where it should happen today.
Yeah. That's
why we have a legal system, you know?
Well, I think that's like the whole concept we talked about before of maintaining our Christ-like principles. It's not giving allowance for others' behaviors. And I think that's where you build those lines of saying like, hey, the way that you are acting is completely un-Christ-like and not acceptable.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is not okay. I think we need to get better as Christians at saying like, this is not okay.
Yeah.
We're drawing a line. This is not okay. Now, and the forgiveness thing, I think you're right where it's like, okay, forgive, and then it doesn't affect your life, or, you know, you can't go through the natural range. You can't grieve. You can't be angry. It's just like put a smile on your face and move on. And there's sometimes a lack of accountability. And sadly, I would also say that has been potentially used, in my personal opinion, for even like levels of physical abuse in like marriages and stuff.
Oh, 100%.
Where it's like, oh, you need to submit to your husband.
Yeah.
Like you need to forgive him that he makes mistakes. And it's like, no.
Yeah.
Like this is not okay.
Forgive, yes, but the church needs to hold its men accountable.
Yeah, like either side too, but yeah, it's like there will not be physical violence 100%. That you will show your spouse.
Yeah.
It's not a
100%.
Forgive and move on. It's okay. What if there's a continual, like if there's an apology, if there's a repentance, then let's talk about the restoration path. And obviously that begins with forgiveness. But like I've talked to my buddy about this, and it says, hey, if someone's in an abusive relationship, you say, yeah, you need to forgive them, but you also need to get the heck out of there.
Exactly.
Because that's not a safe place for you to be in.
Totally.
So you forgive, but you still build those boundaries, those healthy Christ-like boundaries of, I will not allow you to physically or emotionally abuse me.
Totally.
No more. Walk away.
And that's just such the weird, like we've built up such a weird theology of marriage, I think, in the last 100 years. You know, I feel like submission has to be the most controversial word in all of Scripture. It's just so weird because, I mean, I think when you say submission, like you think of like, you know, like the octagon and like MMA and like submit. Like you know, he lost due to submission or something.
It's about power and control and authority.
Yeah, and we totally forget that it goes both ways.
It's a mutual sacrifice.
It's like husbands are, you know, what is it? Love your wife as Christ loves the church.
Sacrifice your life for her. Yeah.
And you're like, how do you get this like absolutely garbage theology of like men are this like ruling class like above their wife? Like that is over the dominion of the planet. Totally. Where did Jesus ever do that in Scripture? Ever? And it's just it causes so many issues. And then I think you get a lot of women that get in this and they're like, well, I'm just trying to serve my husband and serve God because they've been raised in and fortified with this theology of marriage and submission that is not what God intended. Mm-hmm. And so they just feel stuck of like, well, this is what marriage is.
There's like no voice for them.
Yeah, which is crazy. But then on top of that I think the church looks back at it and is like, oh, well, you're just not submitting to your husband, or you're not fill in the blank, or like, oh, you know, it's your fault because you're not doing this. And it's like, yes, there's probably things that need to be worked on from both sides. 100%. There always is. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't excuse any behavior ever.
Yeah.
You know, like, and that's, I think that's just such a, again, like the church starting on the back foot with it, you know, like it was funny. I was having a conversation with a friend, and we were talking about, like gay marriage. I grew up in California right when they were passing, I think it was Proposition 18. I think that was the one that banned gay marriage in California back in like 2006, 2008, something around there.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah,
I don't live in California.
Like fairly recent memory. And we were talking about this was a couple months ago. My friend and I were talking about this of like, you know, like marriage and gay marriage and allowing that. And we just got to this interesting point in the conversation where we were like, you know, like the church is so against gay marriage, but they're also not willing to fix the problems with marriage that exist, you know, as we've set it up, you know, like it was just an interesting, like the church is like, we absolutely can't have gay marriage, but they're not willing to take a step back and be like, well, do we, like, what is our theology of marriage? Is it good? Like, if we go back to the Scripture, like, is this what God intended for marriage, how we have it set up right now? I mean, because when you look at the divorce rates inside and outside the church, almost identical.
That's what I've heard. I've actually heard countering statistics. Some people say yes, some people say no. And some people say the church is higher, but I think it depends on who you ask.
I think it does. I mean, in theory, the Census Bureau should have that. Like that should be like a pretty like hard and fast statistic.
I think that kind of goes to the hierarchy of sin that we've talked about in the previous episodes, where sometimes we give a pass for certain things and other things just like, oh, nope, that's it. But it's the same severity of a sin on another level, but it's like, oh, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
Like, you know, sleeping outside of marriage or whatever else, stuff like that. And it's like, whatever. But, and so, yeah, it is interesting how we have those different, you know, I don't know, viewpoints or what we care about, what we decide we want to fight for in, I would say, a secular culture. And I think that is part of the pushback is our culture is becoming more and more secular. And depending on what your belief is of how our country was founded, if it was founded on Christian principles or not, some people have differing arguing viewpoints on that.
Yeah.
Like some people say, oh, they were deists, and so they believe God existed but didn't interact with society or with the world at all. And so there's different arguments on that. But I think it's fairly clear that at least biblical principles were built in this country.
Yeah.
But then you have when you have that, slavery was okay.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's definitely not biblical and not okay.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, well, if it was built on Christian principles, but at the same time, in slavery, I believe the United States was like the second country in the world that abolished slavery, or it was
interesting.
top 5 or something, like one of the first in the world. So I wish slavery was never a thing.
Yeah.
But I do think part of it's like there's a pushback right now to biblical principles.
Yeah.
And I think that is saddening for Christians, and it causes a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
Like with the gay marriage things, there's like a pushback to Christian principles and values. And I think there's and there's people that are like, well, this isn't okay. And then it's like, okay, well, what are we going to fight for? Then it's like, again, building the boundaries of like, okay, like if you guys choose to do that, okay, but as a country, as a civilization, but here's the line. Like, we think that this is, like, you still have freedom to voice your opinions.
Oh, totally.
You know?
And I think when, this is escaping me. I had it a second ago. Of when the Israelites were in captivity one of the times, and God was like, pray for them, because when they prosper, you prosper. You know, like
in the Old Testament?
Yeah, pray for your captors. You know, talking about that. But I think it starts with us. You know, I think it starts with us living out the gospel.
Yeah.
Here and now.
And that's what are we responsible for?
Yeah.
We're responsible for ourselves.
Yeah.
I think as parents, obviously, you have responsibility over your children until they grow up. Mm-hmm. But it's how can we live out biblical and Christ-like principles in the way that we live? Yeah. And I will say, when we even talking about boundaries, we're talking about, but like, hey, this is not how we're going to do things, at least in our family, in our life, whatever. In the parable of the unforgiving debtor, one of my favorite things that kind of stuck out to me, even I didn't realize it till I was preaching on Sunday morning, is that the people drew a line in the parable.
Yeah.
Because the
other servants were like,
yeah, they're like, this isn't okay.
Is weird. Yeah.
Like, we're not going to allow this type of behavior. Yeah. You were forgiven millions of dollars, and then you're going to get this dude for $1,000 that he owes you, and you've thrown him in jail. Like, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And we're not going to accept this behavior.
And so what did they do? They went to the king.
They go to the king and they say, hey, this is what's happening. And the king's like,
Yeah.
And then
I think that's good.
And so that was a boundary that they built. And the sad thing is, I think there is, in our culture, we just let things slide. Like, even in churches, it's like, oh, you know, sometimes people would say, like, my friends told me, like, oh, it's just how they are. But it's like, well, that's not okay.
Yeah.
It's
I like love that. Just be like, oh, he just does that. You're like, well, he shouldn't.
Yeah. You know? It's just that. It's like, what?
Yeah.
So then my friends told me that. So it's and so but they built up that boundary. Yeah. So this behavior is unacceptable.
And I think back to the gay marriage thing really quick. I'm not trying to say like we should allow gay marriage. What I'm trying to say is, if I feel like we can't argue for a healthy, we can't be like, I feel like it's really hard for us to say like, this is what marriage should be when we're not modeling what marriage should be as the church.
Yeah. Like like live it out first.
Exactly.
And because I think in our culture, Christians are really passionate about saying the right things. Yeah. And knowing the right things. Like,
what were those people called in like Jesus's times?
The Pharisees. It's like, look, we dotted all of our I's. Look, we know all the right things. We say all the right things.
Yeah.
But then I think what Jesus cares about, he wants you to know things. Mm-hmm. But the reason we pursue knowledge is so it affects the way that we live.
Yeah.
So we can live Christ-like biblical principles and following in Jesus's example of humility and, you know, forgiveness and forgiving others, and not, you know, following in culture's example. And I think now as Christians, it's hard because it is a shrinking community in the United States. Worldwide, we've talked about this before, Christianity is growing.
Yep.
United States, I think we have sadly come to the sin of greed and abundance. I don't know if not abundance is a sin, but it's more of like we have so much.
Yeah.
You know, we have an obesity problem because people have access to so much food.
Yeah.
For the most part. I'm not saying there's not poverty in our country, but it's just like it's excess.
Yeah.
We have, and like even the ability, like or like the economy cruise, and we want to go up and to the right, but at the same time, we are living higher than our means are.
Yeah.
We're living above our means.
Yep.
Meaning we're over $1 trillion in student loan debt. We're $1 trillion in credit card debt. I believe we are multiple trillions of dollars in homeowner debt.
Yeah.
And so it's like eventually that doesn't last forever. The lifestyle that we want to live is unobtainable.
Yeah.
Unless we have tons and tons of debt. And I understand you have like healthy debt and stuff like that.
The reason the lifestyle we want to live is unattainable is because as soon as you attain that thing, you automatically look at like we have a contentment issue.
Yeah. And you want more.
Yeah. As soon as you get what you wanted, you want something else.
Yeah. Like, we have a house on the cul-de-sac. Now I want to go camping in the trailer. It costs $100,000.
Yeah.
But to pull that trailer, I needed another $65,000 giant truck.
Yeah.
Oh, and then I need to get this. And then I need to get this.
Then I need a bigger house because of all this. Yeah.
And then I need a bigger house to store all my big stuff.
Totally. And instead of being like, oh, hey, I'm living above my means.
Yeah.
I think we have this idea of like, oh, I'm living above my means. I need to make more money. Instead of like, I'm living above my means. What do I need to change?
Yeah.
You know, how can I cut back? How can I live a simpler life?
Or travel. I mean, travel is like so expensive.
Yeah.
And, you know,
I'm not saying don't travel.
I'm not saying that stuff. I'm not saying
know?
having a trailer's bad. I'm not saying any of that stuff. I think that's awesome stuff. I'm just saying, I think in our country, everybody feels like they all deserve everything.
Yeah.
Like if they can do it, I want to do it too.
Yeah.
Like and maybe it's, they worked their tail off and maybe they have no family time and they have a lot of money, but they have no life outside of work.
Yeah.
And so,
or maybe a family member died and they inherited that thing.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, what's the trade-off? Like your family member died and you get a trailer.
Yeah.
You know, I think we have this like soft prosperity gospel. Mm-hmm. I think first and foremost, God doesn't call us to be prosperous. He calls us to be holy.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's like the biggest, we conflate like prosperity with holiness. And it's just, that's such an easy argument to knock down because you just opened the book of Job.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you're like, this dude had everything. He had all the trailers. He owned all the cul-de-sacs.
Yeah.
You know, like he had everything you could want. And then at the snap of a finger, it was gone. Mm-hmm. You know,
it's interesting. I came across, I think it was a meme. It was an interesting story, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but I'll try my best.
Okay.
So there's a guy who was working like a 9 to 5.
Okay.
He was like a small business owner.
All right.
And the story goes, he was chilling on the side of kind of like a pond, smoking a pipe after a day's work, and you know he's just hanging out, enjoying life.
Sounds good.
And then a guy comes by. And he says, like, hey, like, what are you doing? And he says, oh, I'm just hanging out here. And he's like, well, why? Like, why aren't you working? He's like, well, like, why? The guy says, well, like, don't you want to grow your business? Don't you want to, you know, make more money? And don't you want to, you know, be able to like franchise your business and grow it more and then become a public company and then be able to sell stock and then become a multi-billionaire and the guy's,
I have a headache.
Yeah. And the guy's like, why would I want to do that? And then the guy responded with, well, then you can make tons of money and then you can relax and enjoy life. And then the guy responded with, well, what do you think I'm doing right now? He's like, I'm relaxing. I'm literally doing what your ending goal was.
Yeah.
I just don't have all of the stuff that comes along with it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think in our country, I think there's an awesome work drive. And I think that's a positive thing. Like we want people to work really hard. We want people to use their gifts and their intelligence and go to school and be productive members of society.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we can't let that become who we are.
Yeah. Working isn't bad.
Working is a wonderful thing. It's the theology of work. It's working from our rest instead of resting from our work, which is a Pete Scazzaro quote right there. But
come on.
But yeah.
Yeah. Dang. This has been good.
This has been a great episode.
Yeah.
We talk about so many things. We hope you guys enjoy this. We try to talk about things that we talk about the scripture from the Sunday before, but also we talk about, you know, what's relevant and we think what people are processing through in their own lives and the questions. And again, we're not saying that we're right for anything. We're just kind of trying to have open conversation. And if you have any feedback, put it in the comments below, like Myrna.
Or if there's things you want us to talk about.
Sure.
And I mean, we're just two normal dudes, and we're going through stuff, and we know people that are going through stuff. So there's stuff on our hearts, and this is a place where we can chat about it.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, until next time.
Until next Monday.
Woohoo.
Well, Wednesday, I guess.
I guess Wednesday for you guys. Monday for us.
Nice. See you guys.